Moonshine Jesus, baby, alright. Moonshine Jesus, a surprising delight. Moonshine Jesus, won't you shine a light?
Hello and welcome to the Moonshine Jesus Show. We're certainly glad that you have joined us here today. We also want to make sure that you join us in future episodes. So make sure that you follow us on Facebook and follow us in any of the places where you get your podcast. We're listed there. So go ahead and sign up for the broadcast. We're glad that you have joined us. I am glad that my buddy Caleb has joined us. How are you doing today, Caleb?
Hey, I'm doing fantastic. How are you, Mark? Not as nice backdrop today.
Right. It's not quite the same as the beach backdrop from last week. Well, it is what it is. I'm excited to be here still, even without the beach backdrop, because I think this is going to be really interesting. We're talking about Hulu's latest iteration of the movie series Predator. Is going to be pretty interesting. It's a very surprising movie. But before we get started, I want to mention that we are sponsored by progressivechristianity.org, a great place for you to go and get all your progressive Christian needs filled there. Also, very important, we always like to make sure that the listeners out there know this show is a spoiler-full, not spoiler-free, a spoiler-full zone. You're going to hear things that you might not want to hear if you haven't seen whatever we're talking about. So just be aware of that. It might be worth the risk because it's such a fun show. You might enjoy it anyway. It is. We have a great time. And speaking of having a great time, Caleb, we talked about this last time. You and I, even after the show finishes, frequently have a very good time. Like
we do.
Once we stop the broadcast, there's frequently more conversation.
Always. And we've had a few drinks by then, and so we're pretty fun by the end of the show.
Right? Yeah, we're having a good time. A lot of times we find that the conversation goes to even deeper places than we were going during the show afterwards. So we have this thought. And if you're interested, please let us know. Just put it in the comment section here. What about would you like to have an after show where folks, for a very limited amount of buy-in, like $5 a month or something like that, pay, and we send a link out after the show, and we have like another half hour or more of conversation where we're not just talking, but all of our listeners can join in and add their thoughts too. I mean, I think it'd be a blast, don't you?
It would be fantastic. And, it would be fun to hear some other perspectives. I mean, we have a great time talking to each other, but you all have great ideas too. And sometimes, maybe often, better ideas than we have. And so we want to see what you're drinking and hear what you're thinking about these shows too. I want to do it, Mark.
I agree. I think it'd be a lot of fun. So if you're watching live, put that in the comment section. If you're not watching live, email us and let us know what you think. We'd love to do it if you're interested in it. But we do need to keep this show rolling down the road. So Caleb, what we always do at the beginning is have a cocktail, a themed cocktail. So I'm curious, sir, what did you come to the table with today?
Yeah, so last week, I think we both had green drinks, and I decided that I was going to continue that tradition. This week, I'm going to have a green drink.
It was a very green movie. It was definitely a very green movie. There's lots of outdoor greenery. So I like it.
There was a lot of greenery, and the Predator's blood was bright neon green.
Indeed.
And so I am drinking a Predator's blood, and you can see it is bright neon green. And so it's made with Old Smoky Moonshine and some it is the end of summer, and so I'm honoring that with Polar Ice Pops. And so my wife made this for me. Some Old Smoky Moonshine and Ice Pops. How about you, Mark? What do you got?
I am going with, I am rebranding an old drink that had a very insensitive name to it. I'm rebranding the Indian Summer as a native summer. Yeah, of course, there's bourbon in it. Of course, that's where I'm going. I'm rebranding it as a native summer. It's got 2 ounces of bourbon, a splash of sweet vermouth, a little bit of bitters, some orange juice in there. You mix that up together, then you top it off with seltzer, and that is the drink I have here. It looks like a hot summer's day. So cheers to you, sir. I am looking forward to a great show. And we'll catch the rest of you on the other side of this break.
Moonshine Jesus. Moonshine Jesus. Moonshine Jesus. Moonshine Jesus. Won't you shine a light?
Well, hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Moonshine Jesus Show, where today we're talking about Hulu's Prey. Prey is a 2022 American science fiction action horror film based on the Predator franchise. It's the 5th installment, and it is a prequel to the first 4 films, being the first set in the northern Great Plains in North America, and it is set in 1719. And so it is kind of a fun movie, but very different. I loved it. It's got the highest Rotten Tomatoes score of any in the series. I think it's currently at 93% fresh, and
well deserved.
Well deserved, because I thought it did a great job of placing Native people at the forefront, showing that it could be like a regular movie, but starring Native people. And I think that was good. It wasn't necessarily focused just on like Native issues, which is what a lot of these kind of movies want to do, but it showed that Native people can be at the forefront of just a regular film, and it could still be a very successful film. So I do like the science fiction, action, horror genre. But last week, you said that you're not a huge fan of this genre. So I want to know what you thought about it, what your take was.
Well, look, so at our house, we struggle with trying to find the shows that we both might like. And I'm not a big fan of horror movies in general, because they're so formulaic. They're so predictable. You can just listen to the music alone and figure out when the scares are going to happen. And the jump scares are forecasted and predictable. And it's just boring because you can see everything coming before it happens, which is one of the reasons I have never particularly cared about Predator. But we were in sort of a lull at the house. We were like, let's check this out. We'll check it out. It was more me saying, I think you're going to like this. We'll watch it. I absolutely loved it. Like, I loved this movie. It was not predictable. It wasn't about jump scares. I mean, they were there, but they weren't. That wasn't the main way that they were scaring folks. The resolution to ending the monster was not about brute force. It was about intellect and skill, and it was really well done. And then it was all set against this background of Native culture, for particularly Comanche culture, and it was incredibly well done. It was shown not only just so realistically, but I loved the artistic style. I mean, how can I'm saying artistic style about a horror movie, but there were these great moments where the main character Naru, a girl who is wanting to become a warrior and is working against the kind of expectations of her tribe. And there's these great moments where the women are walking off to do women's work, and they have and they're doing very realistic depictions of what would have been traditionally mostly thought of as women's work, of them walking off, with her walking the exact opposite direction, getting ready to go do her own kind of more warrior-oriented training that she's doing for herself. And there's these lovely artistic moments even that are happening where visually we're seeing this, them going across each other. I thought it was done so well on many levels. I mean, What did you come away feeling?
Yeah,
about
so
it?
that scene in particular that you were just describing was one that hit me too, because she had it kind of left the impression that she had failed her task, right, and she was going to go back
Right.
to the women's work, like the gathering
Exactly.
work, and then she sets it down and she goes back, and you're right to see visually see her going against the grain with all the women going this way and her choosing a separate path. I mean, it was a commentary without having to have it explained. You could visually see what she was doing. So I also like the thought that it was women's empowerment here without being heavy-handed about it. Like she was a real person who just was trying to learn how to hunt better. It just was what she felt like she wanted to do. And so it showed her kind of struggling, and it felt as if she was a real person. And I think maybe that's one of the things I liked about it most, is that she was a very relatable character. Naru was just a very human character. And we weren't getting a heavy-handed message about like a warrior woman or women empowerment. And that's kind of what I went in expecting, because I knew what the movie was going to be about. I knew that it was, you know, a woman in the main role. And I thought, well, what we're going to see is her, 2 hours of her going head to head with the Predator, brute force. And you're right that really what it was about was her using her intellect and showing how the intellect was superior. And I thought that was a fantastic move. I loved it. I
did. It was so smart, and they did so many things that you don't normally see in movies like this, and you certainly haven't seen in any of the Predator movies. I love the way they built her character. Her brother asking her, "Why do you want to hunt?" and her saying, "Because y'all all think I can't." I love that kind of like setting the character up that way. But then later on, the question comes up of why Naru? Why are you so dangerous? And she says, "I'm dangerous because I'm not seen as a threat."
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
and one
of the best lines in the movie.
And that was incredible. And going back to, again, how in the world is a horror movie artistic? They have artistically set up that line because the Predator historically has only gone after threats. And so she's saying, I'm not just dangerous. I'm dangerous not only because the Predator doesn't see me as a threat, but you don't see me as a threat. You don't think I should hunt. You don't think this is right for me. I'm dangerous because nobody, the Predator, my own people, don't see me as a threat, which is my real power. And that's where my strength comes from. I thought that was brilliant and such a great lesson. Particularly in a culture right now where we're all about bravado and about asserting power, that maybe the real power is when you're not seen as a threat but have this technical ability, this skill set, this intellect to be able to affect change or outcomes.
That's also a very Christian message, I think, right? Because the Christian message isn't about the bravado. It's not about the brute force, right? It's about changing the underlying systems and changing within yourself so that you're looking at the world in a peaceful way and going through the world in a peaceful way. And so to me, that really resonated for that reason too, because even though this wasn't about Christian theology at all, right? I sat there and I watched and I thought, this is what Jesus's message was about. It was about living your life kind of like this, in a way that you're changing the world little by little, not going out in this big kind of with gusto, but going and addressing the small things as you can do them. So I really appreciated that. I also appreciated the way that, in speaking of artistic pieces of the movie, the way that they incorporated ritual throughout this. And I think that was something that was very interesting for me, is how they used ritual markers throughout the movie, right? So there's this whole thought that she's supposed to go out and hunt something that is hunting her, right? It's this kind of coming of age thing as she's coming into her own as a warrior, and the ritual markings of that. And I also felt like we got the scenes where someone is kind of named the warrior king or queen after they've defeated an animal, and there's this whole ceremony around all of that, and this whole ritual piece. And there were several scenes that involved water, right? At significant moments where you get her cleansing in the water, you get kind of like a kind of a baptism imagery at pivotal moments when she's going through a change of like inner awakening as she's coming to see herself more as someone who really does have power and significance. And that was something that really spoke to me. Did the ritual stuff resonate with you at all?
Oh, absolutely. And I loved the flip-flopping of the men coming in with their prey, and it was significant, at least in terms of the culture that they were in and what we were all looking at. But I loved how it flopped when she finally defeated the predator, and she comes in with this. It's like, you've undersold me for so long, and I felt excluded from these rituals in some ways because you don't think I should be a hunter. And then she gets to have this final victory, which everyone else wasn't able to. Pulling on more than just brute strength, but pulling on her wisdom, on her intellect, on her ability to sit and analyze and make choices and decisions of it. And then she shows up with this prize, essentially, this head for the ritual that's bigger than anything else, unlike anything they've ever seen. And there's this kind of moment where everyone's standing around looking at each other like, what do we, is this okay? And then it's like full on celebration, and it's like this wonderful victorious moment, and you can almost feel a cultural shift that happens there. I will say, though, I don't want to present this as if there aren't historical records of very strong warrior women from natives. A matter of fact, there is this, according to some sources, General Custer was actually defeated by Buffalo Calf Road Woman. So there are several sources that believe that General Custer himself was defeated by a native warrior, Buffalo Calf Road Woman. So I don't want to present it as that is very so unbelievably unique, and it was only in a movie that it could happen. There's some sources that say it happened in real life, but I do love that in this particular tribe, it was very clear that it was masculine dominated, and that this woman Naru completely, like in this one moment, ultimately shifts their whole understanding of their culture and their respect for women as warriors.
And that's a good point, Mark, because there's quite a bit of evidence to show too that in indigenous tribes that there was greater equality. You know, there was some understanding of gender roles, but there was also an understanding that that people were equal and that women had leadership roles and that their voices were listened to and respected. And so that even in this movie where there's kind of this masculine dominance, that scene that you were just talking about where she comes in with the head of the predator, there's even a finer moment, I think, when everyone's looking around, but the chief of the tribe looks at Naru's mother as if like, are we supposed to make her the warrior? And the mother just nods her head. And then and so I think that's a kind of a significance of the role that women played in the tribe and the role her mother did. It is like the chief looked to her and she said yes, and he gives it, and there's that cultural
that was
shift.
brilliant.
It was a wonderful, and this movie for a horror movie, right? A Predator movie, the last Predator movie. It's crazy, right? Because the last Predator movie I saw. It's unexpected because the last one I saw was Alien vs. Predator, and it was a bad movie. It was a bad movie. And so this, to like have cultural commentary that's unspoken and visually shown is powerful. Oh, Mark, there is a lot here. I love this movie,
indeed.
and there are a lot of theopolitical themes that we can get into, I know. So why don't we pivot? We've geeked out a little bit. Why don't we pivot and let's talk more about theology and politics in this next segment.
Moonshine Jesus. Moonshine Jesus. Moonshine Jesus. Moonshine Jesus, won't you shine?
Welcome back to the Moonshine Jesus Show. You're joining us for our theopolitical segment. So I think this theopolitical segment will be slightly different, maybe, than a lot of ours, in that it's less, for me at least, I think the direction we need to go is less about what was in the movie than what the movie represents. So I want to start from, at least in the last decade, or maybe even 2 decades.
Yeah.
Nationally, our recognition of the native peoples has been pretty much lacking, even in the news. I mean, I think the one thing we have is the pipeline protest of the Standing Rock Sioux Reservation in North Dakota, which raised some awareness and gave us some, but it really became a very divisive news piece, more so than a piece that was looking to understand native peoples. So one of the things what I'm thinking about is some of the statistics that I think it's very important. This show did such a great job of doing fair representations, and I think what we have in our current culture is unfair and not real representations. Quite the opposite of what this movie did. So listen, 1 in 3 native peoples are living in poverty. And natives have a significantly higher lack of health equity than the average American citizen, and pretty much on any measurement of having a life that is sustainable and reasonable and healthy. We have a giant lack in this culture in particular, maybe more so than almost all other areas. So I'm curious why you think that continues to be the case, and why it is something, even as we looked at the pipeline, we weren't going too deeply into that. We almost turned our heads to any of the realities there. And what do you think's behind why all of this is the current reality, and why are we not doing anything about it?
Yeah, and racism and culturalism. I think so. I grew up in Missouri, like an hour from Oklahoma, which has a high native population, and I remember that in school I had one unit once about native people in the United States, and it was not something that we ever talked about whenever I was growing up. And so I've talked to a lot of folks who grew up in that same part of the country and never heard anything about it. And I remember even when I was in college, we had a Native American religions. I was a religious studies major, Native American religions class on the books that was never once taught. And so I think we don't have any education about Native peoples, about their traditions, about their histories. I think that makes it easy to other people who we haven't had kind of any experience about. And then I think that the way we have set things up we have set things up to inherently be racist, right? We've set Native peoples up on reservations, and there is endemic poverty there. And I think we also see a lot of environmental racism playing into that, right? So reservations tend to be favorite dumping sites for toxic waste, for instance. Native sites tend to be favorite places to create garbage dumps too. And so our society is set up in such a way so that we continue to oppress Native people, even though we're living in the year 2022. And even though most people look back and like, man, white folks didn't do great things for Native people in the United States. There's no like act for reconciliation. There's no discussion of reparations, how that can be done. I think we continue in our culture to propagate this understanding of Native Americans. I think that is pretty visible.
Yeah, I think it is very visible. And not only do we use it as a dumping ground, but we also let corporations basically rape the land, which is core to Native people's understanding of even who they are. They are a people of the land. and we allow pillaging of natural resources and frequently both dumping on and raping the natural resources of sacred grounds. So, I mean, I think it's a little too simple to just to say it is racism. I feel like, is there not something deeper going on here of why it's so specific? I mean, is there any other group of people in the United States that we consolidate to a confined area and then abuse them within that area on top of it? Is there any other group? It feels like this is even a more extreme version of racism than we see for a lot of other folks. Not that it lessens the racism towards other folks, but it's a very specific kind of racism. And I wonder why it is so different in the way that we address this particular group of peoples. I mean, do you have thoughts on what that could or couldn't be? I mean,
yeah, I think that's a great point, Mark, and a great way to refine how we're thinking about this, because I think all people of color are living kind of marginalized lives in the United States. They're certainly suffering from systemic oppression in the United States as we continue to see, people of color targeted. But you're right, not in the same way that people are confined to their own land. And so I think this is continuing to be kind of an extension of the doctrine of discovery, kind of theology that we see, and the whole thought that whatever we've seen, we've claimed. And so I think there's this kind of sense, especially among white Americans, that, okay, it was pretty bad what we did to Native peoples here, but manifest destiny. It was necessary for the United States to come to be what it was. And so I think a lot of people give that lip service, but they don't really think it was a bad idea. And so there's not really guilt around that in the same way. I think pretty much everyone agrees that slavery was a bad idea, right? Even if you come from a family that inherited wealth because of slavery. But I think there are a lot of white Americans who believe that, even though, we've got to say that it was wrong for the Trail of Tears. And so I think a lot of white American people actually believe that it was necessary to oppress Native folks for the growth of the United States as a superpower and for the growth of the United States GDP. And so I don't think people feel bad at all still today about oppressing Native peoples, because I think they still see it as something that is 100% appropriate and necessary. Obviously, that is completely morally reprehensible and certainly unchristian. But I think a lot of white Americans feel that way, and a lot of white American Christians in particular have a lot of reprehensible views. So I don't know. What do you think, Mark?
Well, I mean, I can hear very clearly what you're saying, and I don't disagree with it at all. But I do think there's more of a subconscious thing going on here, and oddly, I'm going to connect it with homeless people. There is this subconscious thing that we do with homeless folks, where we do everything we can to keep them away from any place we have to see them because of our guilt about their existence. We make benches that they can't sleep on. We put spikes under bridges so they can't lay down. We make rules so that they can't stand on street corners without going through a lot of things that folks who are already struggling would have a difficulty to mount the benchmarks that are required. I do believe that a part of what this is this very subconscious piece of the recognition of a nation that what we did was reprehensible, unforgivable, and instead of trying to make reparations and to correct our issues, we'd much rather push it away to little tiny corners of our nation that we'd not like to pay attention to, and ignore them so much so that that there are issues with health, there are issues with water, there are issues with like anything that makes a decent living standard. I do think there is a bit of just trying to live in denial that we see along, particularly for me, it parallels with the homeless population, which I did some work with, in terms of trying to ignore the reality that's actually there. I think it's both. I mean, I think what you said is very true. I think our cognitive response is what you were talking about. But I think there is a subconscious response that is very much about trying to tuck it away in a place that we don't actually have to pay attention to it. And that makes it even worse.
Yeah, I like that, Mark. You're giving folks more credit than I was. They're actively
right.
people. That the homeless thing though is super real, Mark. You're 100% right about that.
Yeah.
That like
Right.
I've heard so many people. They're like, well, we've got to get homeless folks away from here because it's dangerous or whatever. I'm like, it's not that they're dangerous; it's that it's inconvenient for you to recognize that they
100%.
exist. And so
100%.
I 100% resonate.
And I think that
with
the same
what you're
might
saying about
be true with Native people. Like, before you finish this segment, though, there's one more issue that I really want to talk about that really gets completely covered up, and it is such a major, massive issue. The numbers on this are crazy, and no one's talking about it. So, violence against Indigenous women, Indigenous girls, and Two-Spirit people or gender non-conforming people from the native culture are 10 times higher than any other ethnicity.
Wow.
Any other. So my question to you is twofold. Why do you think that is true about the specific culture of people? And what do we need to be doing about it? Why is it that we're being so silent about it as I mean, that is a damning number, 10 times higher than any other ethnicity. And do you hear about that in any national press, about any, like, do we ever see people talking about that?
Very rarely.
Right.
And I mean, I follow some, indigenous pages and on indigenous news sources. So I hear about it some, but no, in terms of national news, no, you don't ever hear about it. I don't think it's surprising though. I mean, I think that most groups that are marginalized in some way are groups where it is easier for this kind of violence to happen, and for people who are already disempowered and disenfranchised.
But we're talking about 10 times higher, man. We're not talking about.
I know, but it's tied into exactly
why would it be so much more pronounced?
It's tied into what we were talking about earlier. I think it's viewed into how people see it. I think it's also tied into how, like, within the culture itself, like how people recognize, their own disenfranchisement and disempowerment. Because I think, it's not just, say, like, white people going in and inflicting this violence. It's also violence within tribal communities. And I think this kind of thing happens in places where there aren't the same kind of accountability structures. But I don't know. You sound like you've given this a lot of thought. What do you think, Mark? Do you have thoughts about it? Why it's 10 times higher?
Honestly, I was hoping you'd have an answer. I find that number disturbing, and I find the reality disturbing. I'm very fearful for just humanity in general. That the reality is that, and I'm going to use the title of the movie here, that they are seen as easy prey, that they are the most marginalized group of people. And that particularly, and I haven't seen the statistic on this, and I'm going to put it out there in terms of what my personal belief is. I suspect that most of this violence against these particular group of people are from white men, frankly. And so there is this sense of privilege, this sense of power over that has become so ingrained in white men, and that this group of people in particular are seen as very easy prey because we as a nation ignore their value. We ignore what we have done to them. We marginalize them into very small areas of even the space that they occupy in our nation. And so for me, that is alone the reason why we need to make monstrous more efforts to open things back up, to make reparations for all of the harm that we have done, to educate ourselves, and to lift back up these nations who are so foundational to this land.
Great point. Great point, Mark.
Well, we could go on, and these are very important topics, but we only have a limited time. And I have so much fun in our next segment, where we each get to try, at least do our best, to make our co-host look stupid. So we're going to do that right after the break.
Mm-hmm. Hello, Moonshiners, and welcome back to the Moonshine Jesus Show. We are entering our last segment of today's episode on Pray, the Make Me Look Stupid segment.
Woo-hoo!
And this is a lot of fun, where we get to ask a lot of questions and try to make each other look stupid. And so, Mark, before I get too distracted, I want to pick up on what you were just saying, and about how we ought to be doing more, to educate and to lift up the traditions of Native peoples here in the United States.
Yeah.
And so here's my question specifically. I want to know what churches can do, what Christians can do to do a better job of lifting up Native peoples. I mean, it doesn't seem to me that just, say, doing a land acknowledgement is enough, which is something that is becoming more common in churches, right? Here in San Diego, we often say we're on Kumeyaay land. But what is it that we can do beyond land acknowledgements and beyond just kind of giving lip service to standing in solidarity with Native tribes to ensure that we're doing a better job as Christians?
I'll give three answers to this, a three-part answer. I think first of all,
that's quick, Mark. Quick processing, right?
Hey, at this point, I am well lubricated, so the mind works faster. I don't know. I'm not so far lubricated that it works slower. So I'm gonna give a
three-part answer. Okay,
a three-part answer. So the first thing I think that we can do is spend more time educating ourselves and learning about the culture and learning the history and understanding, and not making it so oversimplified that it's either a very violent group or a very spiritual group, but actually just understanding this deep, amazing culture that went on, that had a lot of equality in it, that understood creation and the importance of creation and the connectedness of all of us to creation and to each other. There is so much valuable work that we can do there, that if we learn more about, that it's going to provide a lot more respect for the culture. Second thing I would say is to give, to donate. There are a lot of groups out there that are working towards the betterment of Native peoples in terms of education, in terms of health, in terms of living conditions, and even in terms of political advocacy. So I think you need to do a lot more of that. And then we need to do our own political advocacy. That'd be the third part, where when we vote, we need to be paying attention and asking very specific questions. I honestly think this is a very important issue that we have ignored far too long in our nation. And we need to be bringing in candidates that will advocate for Native peoples and promote their needs and promote a giving back to those nations for all that we took from them. So for me, that's the three things: education, giving, and to groups that are already doing the work, because churches aren't going to get up to speed fast enough. You need to just go ahead and connect with the groups that are already doing the work and promote them and give to them. And then finally, make sure you're voting for folks that actually make a difference and promote policy and polity that helps Indigenous peoples.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts in there?
Well, I love that, Mark. I love the thought of putting our money where our mouth is, in particular, to ensure that we're actually contributing to help Native tribes. I like the thought of not just voting for people who we think will be supportive of Indigenous peoples simply because of, say, the political party that they belong to, but also asking where Indigenous people are on the ballot. Right.
Yes.
And if there are Indigenous people on the ballot, as there sometimes are in Southern California, I often will vote for people for that reason, with
Love that.
the recognition that
I know I liked you
that's
for
where
some
my
reason.
for some reason the drinks and voting. But, I think churches can do things liturgically as well that
Oh, absolutely.
that really can help. I do
Great point.
think there is value to the land acknowledgement. I think there is value to talking theologically about climate change and how
Yep.
and how environmental racism particularly affects Indigenous tribes. I think there's also some real effort that can be made in connecting Christian theology with Indigenous spirituality. And I remember when I was growing up, my we had a youth minister who was preaching John 3:16. Jesus is, the way, truth, and life.
The way, the truth, and
Yeah,
life.
and our no one comes to the Father except through me. Blah
Except
blah
for
blah.
me, yeah.
And
Right.
I was part of a liberal church, and my minister said, "Oh, you can't preach that here. We don't believe that. We believe there are multiple paths to God." And I remember he went to call my grandfather, who was a retired disciples minister, to see if this is how all disciples of Christ believed. And my grandpa talked to him about Native American spiritual beliefs and the thought of Indigenous beliefs about the Great Spirit and all things being created, and how compatible that was with Christian theology.
Yeah.
And I
Oh,
think that if
absolutely.
we do work like that in worship,
Mhm.
talking about that's powerful. So I like your ideas, Mark, and I love any ways that churches can
So
be
look,
involved.
this is an important topic, so I think we need
Yeah.
to go ahead and just allow ourselves to run over. Would you expand on the importance? Because I don't think a lot of
Yeah.
people really understand or even exposed to. Would you expand on the importance of land acknowledgement?
Yeah, so if you're not familiar with this, one of the things that is it's recognizing that the land that you sit on isn't really your land, right? Even if
Yep.
you own the deed to the property, that it was forcibly taken from a native group. And so the land acknowledgement is recognizing that this isn't your land that you're
Yeah.
on. So you start out from that place of humility. And in San Diego, most of the land is Kumeyaay land. And so to say that this is Kumeyaay land, we recognize that the reason we have this is because of racism and violence and appropriation, and that's not appropriate. So other acts that are connected to land acknowledgements can be some form of reparation, which I think is something that's maybe important in the monetary piece that you're talking about, Mark, is recognizing that in some way we ought to do what we can to compensate Native peoples for the land that was forcibly taken from them.
Absolutely. And I appreciate you expanding on that, because I know it's sort of a new concept to a lot of people, and it's more than worth taking the time to expand on that. So thanks for that explanation. So
Absolutely.
now it's my turn. Now I get to try to make you look stupid.
Tell me.
And I don't know that this is a question that will actually make you look stupid, but I think it's a very important question. It's a big question. There's a lot of answers to it. I'm just curious as what your answer will be. What? I'm just going to ask the question. I'm not going to preface it. I'm not anything.
Okay.
Here's
okay.
the question.
Yeah.
What's the biggest threat to the native peoples of this land right now? What's the biggest threat?
Okay, I've got a 52-part answer for you, Mark, and here we go.
Wow. Wow, you're more lubricated than I am.
I know, right? look, I really think that the what I was talking about earlier, the biggest danger facing Native peoples right now is the same danger that is affecting all of us, the most pressing issue of our time. But I think it is more so a danger for Native peoples, and that's climate change and the environmental racism that's resulting. Right. So if you've got people who are segmented to the least desirable land in the country, as we do, then those are the pieces of land that are most likely to be impacted by climate change. And we see that. We've got Native peoples living in the desert, right? So these are places that are already dry and barren as it is, and climate change is already impacting that. And as we mentioned earlier, this is we have seen that any desirable land that people still have access to, like say the Dakota Access Pipeline, right, that we're talking about, like that land's going to be taken away, and we're going to move people to somewhere else. And so then whatever land we have, we're just going to dump whatever crap that we have that's not good for the environment there. So I think that's the next stage of this that we're seeing, that we're just kind of beginning. I mean, some people have been aware of this for longer, but I think Christian theology in particular is just becoming aware of the fact, like, hey, environmental racism is a thing, and it's really impacting people of color, and it's especially impacting Indigenous folks, and we see that by the way that we see stuff dumped on the limited amount of land that we've allowed folks to have. So I don't know. What do you think is the most pressing?
Well, I think that's a great answer. Honestly, I really genuinely do, particularly considering the connectedness of Native peoples with the land. From a Christian standpoint, early Jews understood them to be a people of the land. So there's a lot of spiritual significance to the idea of recognizing the threat of endangering creation. I'm going to go a little bit larger than that in my response. I really do think, and you and I both of us from different perspectives already talked about this. I think the biggest threat to Native peoples is ignorance, lack of knowledge. I think the more we can educate people, and the more that we expose all the things we're trying to hide, subconsciously, consciously, in whatever way, I think the more that we are real about what happened and what we have done to a group of people, and the significance of their culture and the value of who they are, and a great depth of history, of understanding our connection to the land, connection to each other. I think our ignorance to that is what causes the way we treat this specific group of people, and take advantage in a way that abuses them. And I feel like if we were more educated about who they are and what we have done to them, and the value they could add to our society, I feel like if we could do that, we would correct a lot of the wrongs that we've already done.
Well, that's a pretty good philosophy, I think, for lots of things. Let's try to break down ignorance, and let's. I love that, Mark. That's a good, and that's our philosophy here at the Moonshine Jesus Show. Let's drink and let's break down some ignorance. So thank you for joining us today as we're striving to break down. Yes, and
let's not forget to tell people what next week's going to be about.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Because next week,
ignorance might be a part of this conversation ultimately.
It might be. We are watching Avatar next week. Yeah. The re-release of Avatar. Did you watch that when it came out?
I watched it when it came out.
Ago? Yeah.
Yeah. I watched it when it came out. It was honestly, I probably got so caught up in the brilliance of just the visuals of it all that I kind of probably missed the subtones of what the story was about. Did you see it?
I did, and this was like the first big 3D premiere. I remember that
It was incredible.
it was
Yeah.
all over, and this was before it became such a thing that you're like, another 3D movie, no thanks. That this was one when everyone's like, oh, you got to go see Avatar. It's 3D.
Right.
You get the glasses, and they're not
and
the
now
blue
they're-
and red lenses.
They re-digitized it. They're re-releasing it to theaters. So great opportunity this week.
I think it's going to be a lot of fun. So if you haven't watched it, go rewatch it. Go rewatch it in the theaters. It ought to be a fun time to go out and we'll talk about that.
Visually is a big movie. Seeing on the big screen really changes your experience.
It does. It does. So I can't wait to watch it again and come back and talk about it next week. Thanks for a great show today, Mark. It was a lot of fun, and I think we covered some important topics. So cheers.
Cheers to you, sir. And thanks to everybody. See you next time on
The Moonshine Jesus Show.
Moonshine Jesus.